Good morning, my name is Seamus Ferguson and I'd like to welcome you to this short presentation about performance appraisals. You're soon going to be implementing performance appraisals within your business, and so this presentation has been designed to help provide you with some support and guidance to help you get the most from the appraisal process. In addition, you'll also receive a manager's guide to conducting appraisals in the form of a Word document, which basically provides a summary of the process and how to get the best out of the meeting and the whole process itself. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you. The presentation will describe what performance appraisals are, whilst focusing on your process and paperwork, and also the importance of following up the outputs from the appraisal meeting. Performance appraisals provide a structured opportunity to improve performance and build the capacity and capability of your people throughout the business. It's important that you see appraisals as a continuous process and not a once a year meeting, and this can be broken down simply into a process of what you need to do before, during and after the appraisal. As appraisal manager, it's your responsibility to manage the process and ensure that you and your appraisee get maximum benefit from it. Here you can see an overview of the appraisal process. Starting on the top left hand corner, you as appraisal manager will need to complete some details on the front cover. You'll also, moving forwards, need to complete the individual specific objectives before passing the form on to your appraisee. The appraisee has to complete the green sections, which we'll explain a little bit later, and then return the form to you, ideally doing this 48 hours before the meeting, which will give you a chance to prepare. It's your responsibility to make all the necessary arrangements for the meeting and to communicate this back to the appraisee. You'll also then need a little bit of time to prepare yourself for the meeting. The meeting's then conducted, and following that meeting, again, your responsibility to complete any outstanding paperwork, ensure that a copy of the appraisal form is sent to the training department, and importantly, a copy is passed to the appraisee. Beyond that, it will also be your responsibility, in conjunction with the appraisee, to follow up on the outputs and any agreed actions from the meeting. Preparation is a key part of the appraisal process. On average, an appraisal meeting will usually last for about an hour, but they can take up to 2 hours, certainly no more than that. When you also factor in preparation and follow-up, it's important to be mindful of allocating sufficient time to this process to ensure that you get the most from it. It's also important to communicate with your appraisee regularly at each stage of the process, and particularly to assure them of what the purpose of the process is, and also that the outcomes will be acted upon. In your preparations, it's worth thinking about the areas that you want to probe, questions that you might want to ask, and any future plans that you have for your appraisee. And also you'll want to review their comments and the scores that they've put on to the documentation which they've given back to you. Where appropriate, you may also want to gather together any relevant information on their performance which you can use to help support the appraisal meeting. Appraisals are an evaluation of an individual's performance, and there are a couple of sections within your documentation that require you and your appraisee to score certain competencies. The purpose of appraisals is to improve performance, and therefore it's critical to have a frank, open and honest discussion aimed at achieving mutually beneficial outcomes. There is evidence that some managers may overscore individual performance to avoid what they perceive as difficult conversations. This is clearly bad practice, and in almost every case it will lead to greater problems in the future. It's therefore in everyone's interest to score honestly and to accurately establish an individual's actual performance levels, which will then enable you to plan effective and realistic improvements. It's also a good idea to have some specific examples of performance in mind to substantiate your scores. And also, very importantly, in your discussions with your appraisee, to emphasise the importance to them of scoring honestly, and that this ultimately will help them improve their performance and develop their careers. Of course, there may be occasions when you will be faced with a more challenging conversation. For instance, you may have an appraisee who has scored themselves higher than you think is accurate. When you're faced with a conversation that you think is going to be a little more difficult, then you may want to consider these points. It can be very helpful to move a conversation to a mutually beneficial outcome by focusing on the future and not the past. Past focused conversations invariably go round in circles, with both parties trying to prove who's wrong and who's right. The key here is to find a solution. So if you like, past is for reference, not residence. It is important to review past performance, but the purpose here is to move forwards and look to the future. Ultimately, we can't change what has gone, but we can influence what is to come. Therefore, as appraisal manager, it's important that you adopt an approach and a mindset that focuses on how we can improve and not what went wrong, which can often lead to a blame game and heated exchanges. Conducting performance appraisals requires very effective communication skills, particularly on the part of the appraisal manager. Data is a simple way to remember the key principles of communication that will hopefully give you some guidance and support in terms of communicating effectively within the appraisal. If you were asked the question, what's the purpose of communication? What would you say? Most people give a response along the lines of, it's about the transfer of understanding, passing a message between two parties. However, if all that communication is about transferring understanding or passing information to another party, then all we've actually achieved is to make that person more knowledgeable and better informed. The D in data stands for do. The purpose of all communications is not just simply to transfer understanding, but it's to transfer the desire to take action. And performance appraisals are no different in this matter. So you may want to consider in your preparations, what do you want the appraisee to do after the appraisal has finished? And this gives some focus to the outcomes and outputs of an appraisal. The A stands for ask, in terms of asking questions, particularly open questions, who, what, when, where. And these are an excellent tool for appraisal managers to get their appraisee to talk. You may also then need to probe for further information, so using phrases like tell me more is a great way of getting people to expand on what they've said. You also want to consider, when using questions, to focus on the future. So you may use comments like, how can we improve that going forwards? What do you think would be a good idea of making that improvement? So we're trying to focus on the future and producing solutions. Questions are a great tool and an important part of any appraisal, and the appraisal manager should be using questions constantly and spending most of the time listening to the responses of their appraisee. The T stands for tone, which refers to your non-verbal communications, which are absolutely critical within an appraisal meeting. As said previously, you want to prepare an opening statement, and this will very much set the tone for the meeting. The words are important, but just as important is how you say it, that you're upbeat, you're enthusiastic, and that you're interested, and this will send a very positive message to your appraisee. If, for instance, you're an appraisal manager that finds performance appraisals a chore, then there's a guarantee that your non-verbal communication will give this away and it'll be communicated to the appraisee. So it's important that you take note of not just what you say and do, but very much about how you say it and how you do it. And finally, the word act is key for the outcomes of an appraisal. It's very true that appraisals are only as good as what follows them. So we need to make sure that actions are set, that we're clear on who is responsible for what, and also to agree future dates to review and check process. The credibility and value of performance appraisals is the effectiveness of the follow-up to the agreed actions. So for instance, if you consider fast forwarding 12 months to the next appraisals, if the actions from the previous year haven't been progressed, then it becomes very difficult to get people to be motivated and take appraisals seriously. So the final word here is action, in terms of following up on the outputs of the appraisal, and this is absolutely fundamental to the success of any appraisal process. So let's take a look at what happens during the actual appraisal meeting. Actively listening to your appraisee is a key fundamental of the appraisal meeting. Listening's hard work and requires a lot of concentration on the appraisal manager's part. However, performance appraisals are about the appraisee, and therefore the appraisal manager's role is to facilitate the discussion, mainly through a combination of asking questions and listening. You may also want to consider the following points: listening positively and giving your full attention, occasionally checking what's being said to ensure that you've understood it and it checks back to them as well. Use eye contact to show that you're listening. Think at the speed that they are talking and don't become impatient and try and jump ahead. Don't interrupt. Sometimes it takes people a little while just to collect their thoughts and to articulate them, so just let them work through that. Stick to their subject, it is their appraisal. Use their name. Take notes, obviously in terms of putting the documentation together, but also it's good practice to just keep a note of what's been said. And just as a guide, in terms of who does all the talking, roughly it should be 30% you and 70% them. It's not always this case, but at least we're trying to encourage appraisal managers to do less of the talking and getting the appraisee to talk more. The introduction to the interview is very important. Some things to consider. Firstly, putting the appraisee at ease. Most appraisees are a little bit anxious at the start of a meeting like this, so it's worth spending a few moments just in general discussion about how things are going before you get down to the business of working through the appraisal form. Reiterate the purpose of the appraisals and the intention to identify improvements in performance and working together to achieve those. Make sure that you invite comments at any time and reinforce this and encourage appraisees to do that. And then finally, before you begin, just outline the structure of how you're going to work through the appraisal form and what will happen once the appraisal is finished. When we look at the appraisal documentation, we can see the outline structure that you will follow, and we'll look at this in due course. And at the end of the appraisal, you should have reached agreed measurable targets. It's also important to consider any support that the appraisee will need, either from you as the appraisal manager or any colleagues. It's also important to set review dates. And finally, to summarise the above, summarise the main outputs from the appraisal meeting and agree the next steps. So So after the appraisal meeting, you need to record the outcomes and ensure that the appraisee receives a completed copy of the appraisal form. A copy should be kept at the regional office on file, and also it's important that you email the appraisal form to appraisals@sedden.co.uk. Going forwards, you need to make sure that you complete your actions and that you monitor and check that the appraisee has completed theirs. And also, if the employee does move departments within the following year, please ensure that you pass on the appraisal information. And just a note on the importance of following up on the outputs of an appraisal meeting. For appraisals to work, people have to feel that they're of value, that they're worthwhile investing their time. And a key factor in ensuring that they're of value is in managing what happens after the appraisal meeting is completed. Most development, as we know, takes place on the job. It's therefore important that the appraisal manager and the appraisee take responsibility and ownership of their development, ensure that the actions and objectives that they agree within the appraisal meeting are progressed. Some of these may require formal training, but many of them will be objectives and targets that will develop actually whilst in their role. So now I'd like to look at the actual appraisal paperwork that you'll be using, and also just to remind you that you will also receive a manager's guide to conducting appraisals, which will provide an excellent summary of the information presented here. So this is the appraisal documentation, and here we start with the front cover. The process is fairly straightforward. Initially you will need to fill in a couple of sections which I'll talk you through, and once you've done that you'll need to then pass the appraisal form over to your appraisee for them to fill in the sections that they need to complete. Once they've done that, and at least 48 hours before the actual appraisal meeting, they need to return the completed appraisal form back to you so that you can then fully prepare ahead of the meeting. On this front cover you'll need to complete the sections here, providing the details about who the appraisee is and so forth. When you do pass the documentation across to your appraisee, it's important that you instruct them to read this information here, which provides lots of useful tips and guidance on helping them to complete the sections of the form. Before you pass the form to your appraisee, then in addition to the front cover and the employee details, the only other element that you need to complete are the manager list of key objectives from last year, which is the blue sections here. Essentially this is a list of what the key objectives have been for the previous year. For instance, you might have to ensure full compliance with health and safety, to complete a job within budget. These would be examples of the kinds of objectives that we're looking for you to place here in the blue sections under the manager's list. Importantly, this is the only section that you need to complete prior to passing the form to your appraisee. Also importantly is that you're asked not to complete your ratings until you actually sit down and meet with your appraisee and complete them in the meeting. However, you will instruct your appraisee to complete the green sections and return those to you before the actual meeting. Finally, the rating definitions are given here at the bottom of the page, and it's important that you explain these to your appraisee and encourage them to be as honest and objective as they can be in assessing themselves, reinforcing the point that this is about development and progression. This section will have been completed by the appraisee prior to the meeting and handed back to you, as you can see all green sections here. When you hand the form to the appraisee, then again it's just a brief discussion with them to give them some guidance as to what they need to be thinking about and writing down to answer these questions. Once in the meeting, it's good to review these responses. Obviously you will have had a chance to have a read through before the meeting, and also to perhaps add your own comments. You may add additional comments following the discussion within the meeting. Also, on this question here about training required for the position, you may well need to and want to refer to the core competency framework, which is available on the training SharePoint page to gain any additional information about available training. To help you complete the core competency review, here are the detailed assessment definitions on this page. Which will help you to complete your review. The review of the core competencies is the next page in the appraisal document. This section will need to be completed at the appraisal meeting itself. Obviously you will need some time before the meeting to prepare and collect your thoughts and any evidence or facts, information that will be helpful to explain the scores that you give. You can use the comment boxes to advise in the briefing why you have given the scores that you have, and also to record any other comments that occurred during the meeting. So you can see down there's a list of competencies, and we need to complete all of those during the meeting itself. The next section that you need to complete is the performance and development plan, where we are setting objectives for the year ahead. This needs to be completed within the appraisal meeting itself, with yourself and the appraisee, working through and writing down the objectives. Obviously it will be a discussion between the two of you to determine how many objectives there are, and you'll simply complete them in this section here. So you'll write the objective down. So for instance, that could be ensuring full compliance for health and safety, and then working across, you then need to consider the required standard in terms of perhaps quality and quantity. In this case, with a health and safety example, it may well be that you need to be in line with company and legal regulations and requirements. You then need to refer and relate this to business and departmental objectives, which can be seen on the back page of this document. In the health and safety example, this would be contributing to a culture of health and safety, and then the target date would be determined by the actual health and safety requirement, whether that be daily, weekly or an annual target. A second example may be the considerate constructor scheme, and trying to achieve an improved score in that. The required standard would be to meet the considerate constructor's own quality standards. How this would relate to the departmental objectives, again, if you refer to the back page, you will see that this is about becoming a contractor who is perceived as a caring contractor and building effective relationships in the community and so forth. And then a target date may well be the next considerate constructors audit. You need to work through this sheet and record as many objectives as is relevant and appropriate, and that will obviously be determined by yourself and your appraisee within that discussion. And this is the final page that needs to be completed. It begins with a scholarship programme, which is an exciting and new initiative which is aimed at developing staff to meet future challenges and opportunities. Potential candidates will need to apply to be on this programme, and there is a very rigorous assessment process. Potential candidates will need to be highly motivated and committed to take part in this programme, and so it's important that you give some serious consideration to those who you may wish to recommend for taking part in this programme. Again, just work through the questions on this page, and again, the green sections will have been completed by the appraisee prior to the meeting, and again, you will have had opportunity to have a look at those and add any relevant comments. And finally, at the bottom of the document, you need to sign this at the end of the meeting and add any final comments to the appraisal documentation. And so this is the operative appraisal form. You need to complete the information at the top of this form, so employee name, job title and so forth, and pass that document then to the operative. This is the only bit that you need to complete at this stage. On the second page of the operative appraisal form is a review of core competencies, and as previously it follows a very similar pattern in that you will score and add comments as appropriate, and this takes place within the appraisal meeting itself. So you can see here as you move down the different competencies listed on the left hand side. At the bottom of the page there's a final question about what the operative's career aspirations are, and that again is something that can be discussed within the actual meeting itself. Also, to assist with completing the core competency assessments are the actual assessment definitions, which can be found here on the opposite page. And here we have the final page in the operative appraisal documentation. There are a number of questions. As you can see, the green sections again will be completed by the operative prior to the appraisal meeting. But the top section is a discussion about the apprenticeship coaching programme, to see if any operatives are interested in becoming a coach for one of your apprentices. During the appraisal meeting then, it's an opportunity to work through the questions and discuss and make any further comments in any of the boxes provided. And then finally, the form needs to be signed at the bottom. You as the appraisal manager will take that away and make any further adjustments or amendments to the form prior to then emailing that to the appraisals@seddon.co.uk email address, which you can see at the bottom of the page, and also ensuring that you pass a copy of the form back to the operative. And finally, look on the meeting as an opportunity for both parties. Involve the appraisee as much as you possibly can. Give some consideration prior to the meeting as to what outcomes you want from the discussion. Always look ahead with future orientated thinking, looking for improvements and solutions. As has been mentioned on several occasions, we can't overstate the importance of preparation both for you and the appraisee. It's important to focus on behaviours and performance and not on personality, and this can be supported by presenting the facts and evidence of actual performance. Give people your undivided attention and listen attentively and actively to them during the meeting. Use your questioning skills to praise and probe, clarify and reflect on comments that your appraisee makes. Importantly, agree realistic actions that are acceptable to both you and your appraisee. And perhaps most importantly of all, follow up on your agreed actions. And so that completes the briefing. I hope you found it useful. Good luck with your forthcoming appraisals. I'm sure they'll go very well indeed. If you do require any additional information, then please contact Melinda Dickinson in your training department. And thanks very much again for taking the time.